Hello, and welcome to our advanced webinar series on the best home network setup practices for Roon. My name is Nathan, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Feel free to stick around until the end of today's webinar, as we'll be holding a live questions and answers session to help with any questions that you may have had throughout this presentation. Today, we'll be covering a few different kinds of topics. Those topics will be optimal practices and setups in your home, specifically how to set up your listening area with your own hi-fi equipment. We'll also be giving some advanced networking tips. And finally, we'll be giving you some helpful tools for troubleshooting common issues that you might be running into. You're welcome to ask us questions throughout this webinar, and we'll be answering your questions live at the end of the session today. So please feel free to keep those questions coming. So why does a network matter in the first place? Well, to put it simply, Roon requires a properly functioning home network to get the best possible experience. An improperly configured network will give you a bad experience, be it from bad networking hardware or bad net connections between hardware. Any sorts of issues will lead you to experience issues in Roon. Maybe you'll see a remote that infinitely loads and doesn't connect to your core. Maybe you're finding a certain zone or audio device isn't showing up inside the Roon app. Or maybe you're running into issues with audio playback. None of those experiences are things that we would expect in a properly run Roon system. And our goal today is to give you the tools to sort out what's happening and minimize issues in Roon that could be caused by a network. No matter what your network setup is like, there are a few important factors to keep in mind when you're using Roon to make sure that you're getting the best experience. First and foremost, your Roon core should always be wired via Ethernet. And if possible, any devices that you're using to store music and stream music to your core should also be wired via Ethernet. That specifically means that if your music is located on another device and is being streamed over your network to your core, maybe you're using a NAS or storing your music on another PC, we highly recommend that that device is not connected via Wi-Fi. Instead, it's better if that device is connected via Ethernet and can stream directly that music to your core, which is also connected to the Ethernet. We found that using an ISP or Internet Service Provider provided router can also cause an issue or poor experience when you're using Roon. These ISP provided routers seem to often use underpowered or poorly behaved hardware or software inside of them. And using that gear often leads to suboptimal outcomes when you're trying to use them with Roon. To that same end, we have found that a lot of Apple networking gear, such as the Airport Express, the Time Capsule, and the Airport Extreme, all seem to have problems with Roon due to poorly behaved hardware. If possible, please don't use these kinds of networking devices if you wish to have the best Roon experience that you possibly can. It's also worth noting, Roon does not support multiple subnets. This means, basically, all of the devices on your network must be connected to the same IP range. Avoid using Wi-Fi range extenders or power line adapters when you're using Roon in your home. These devices modify the behavior of your base network, and they'll hamper Roon's ability to communicate and see the devices as they're available across your home. This means you may accidentally limit the performance that Roon's able to offer when streaming your music to the different devices in your home because of the way that it sees zones and is able to understand how your zones are set up due to your network settings. So let's go over some optimal setups for different home sizes. First up, let's talk about medium homes. For best performance, you want to have your core and your endpoints connected via Ethernet, but your Roon remotes themselves, such as your phone or your iPad, can be connected via Wi-Fi. It's perfectly fine to have one router set up to cover your whole house. You likely don't need more than that. This assumes that you don't have concrete or other heavy building materials blocking the signal coming from your router and then reaching across your whole home. Generally speaking, a single strong router should be able to cover your whole home without any issue. With that said, if you're using a network modem router combo that's provided by your internet service provider, you may want to make sure that that modem and router is set up in bridge mode, meaning that it's functioning exclusively as a modem. From that, you want to connect a stronger router to that modem, and that in that case, you'll be providing Wi-Fi from your more powerful router that you have provided instead of the combo unit given to you by your ISP. This ensures that you'll be taking advantage of whatever features are included with the modem that they have provided and the functionality that you're looking for there, but you're also able to ensure that the very best signal and very best performance from that internal network inside your home are coming from that router that you have provided. If you find that your router is unable to cover the entire area of your home, then it may be time to consider an additional wired access point that is broadcasting to the specific area that isn't connecting or isn't finding signal to that main router you're using. Again, if possible, you want to wire that access point to your initial router so that you have that wired signal going between the two of them. You don't want to use a Wi-Fi range extender, as that can break up into different networks across your home and create different subnets. Or it can cause bandwidth issues, as the signal needs to bounce off the router and then into the extender before it can reach your device. We do recommend using a single router if at all possible, or we recommend using a single wired access point in addition to that router if you must. When it comes to larger home, many of the same principles still apply. For example, we're always going to recommend that you connect your Roon core and your endpoints via Ethernet whenever possible. Of course, your remotes can still connect via Wi-Fi. For a larger setup, multiple access points and a network switch will likely be needed. And whenever possible, we recommend that those access points be wired via Ethernet directly to the main router in your system or the switch closest to the router. In this case, we recommend Cat5e, that's 1 gigabit per second cable or better, for ensuring the best performance across your network. Now, if you have a home where running that cable isn't possible, or you simply can't manage the kind of setup that a router and multiple wired access points around the home require, then it's likely that you'll need a mesh-style network. Mesh networks could include devices such as the Netgear Orbi, Amazon Eero, Linksys Velop, or the Asus Lyra systems. These are all used by our customers, and they're systems where each access point communicates with each other via a dedicated Ethernet backhaul. And these devices have an Ethernet connection that can be used on the mesh satellite for direct connection to your remotes or system outputs. Essentially, a mesh system might not be our first choice of recommendation for your network. However, if you're living in a situation where you can't run the cables necessary for a proper router and access point setup, then that mesh network is a wonderful stand-in. And with the backhaul system that they use, they can communicate very adequately and directly to their main router system and back to your modem. The Ethernet ports located on these mesh router satellites function pretty well as direct Ethernet connections that you can use for your core or audio endpoints in larger homes or any home where you can't run a direct wired system. Really, it's perfectly fine to have your core in a server closet or a rack, and then have your audio devices connected via Ethernet directly to that network. Or you can use a Roon bridge as an in-between output that gives a USB or SPDIF output for the connections for the devices that you want to use across your network. We recommend avoiding managed switches whenever possible. Managed switches have been known to need just the right amount of tweaks to work properly. And when in doubt about what settings are needed, we really recommend using an unmanaged switch if you're going to be using a switch at all for managing your network needs when using Roon. What about designating listening areas? Well, when streaming your music through Roon, we highly recommend using a communication protocol that supports the highest sample rate for your music. Now, in this instance, you're using Roon, And so hopefully you're using a Roon-ready device. We highly recommend using that Roon-ready streaming protocol, as it will ensure the best quality signal in every instance versus Chromecast or AirPlay, for example. You'll optionally want to tweak the sound in your listening room by implementing Roon's DSP functionality. And some of those different functionalities will require more network bandwidth, such as upsampling to DSD. Now, that decision making will be entirely up to you. It'll be up to your ear to decide what EQ settings you want and which ones are best suited for your setup in your listening room. What about our thoughts on Wi-Fi? The bottom line is that ultimately, Wi-Fi is noisy, and in terms of performance, often unreliable. It's really mainly designated for being used by your remote, on your phone, or on your iPad, and it's really not the best for audio streaming. It'll work in a pinch, but it's not what we're going to recommend. Now, it is true that Wi-Fi can traverse through walls and make a lot of things more convenient and for a lot of setups, but that also means that it can cause interference issues. Because of that, we often recommend using a 5 GHz Wi-Fi connection, as it has broader bandwidth and less interference from neighboring Wi-Fi channels compared to 2.4 GHz. Sometimes Wi-Fi issues can occur simply because you're used in a large city, or maybe you have multiple neighbors who are broadcasting on their own personal Wi-Fi setups. Wi-Fi can even be degraded if someone is using a microwave in the same home. If you have many routers or access points set up in the same Wi-Fi network channel, those multiple routers, especially if they're not set up as a mesh system or something similar, can cause increased congestion and, again, hamper the performance and effectiveness of your Wi-Fi network. Another reality of technology is that Wi-Fi protocols change over time. If you're using an older PC for Wi-Fi, it very well could have an old Wi-Fi network card, and that might just not support certain speeds or certain types of network protocols. Mesh-style Wi-Fi networks are still Wi-Fi. They use their own extra Wi-Fi channels to communicate from node to node. That's from one of the pucks to the other pucks. And that means that they have an extra channel or an extra way of communicating with each other. Now, that gets them past the majority of congestion in the home, but again, it's still Wi-Fi. At the end of the day, Wi-Fi is still mainly for using your remote, and that's there for convenience. If you can, we're going to recommend using Ethernet. Sometimes you have to use Wi-Fi. We get it. But just to make sure it's all clear, Ethernet is our main recommended source for listening to your music. And when you ask us, we're going to ask, hey, if you're having a problem, is there a chance you could plug it in via Ethernet? We'll see if that offers a better performance from your system. Now, let's dig into some advanced networking tips. When we're talking about managed and unmanaged switches, we find that managed switches often cause issues with Roon. We've mentioned this a little bit earlier, but again, just to reiterate, we recommend using an unmanaged switch to run your setup. And this means that the unmanaged switch is simply plug and play. It's not configured via web interface or anything like that. We want simplicity. We don't need detailed rules changing how your network switch performs. We want it to act as a simple communication point, and we want Roon to be able to communicate as freely as possible across a switch. Power line adapters, that is, adapters that plug into the power outlet in your wall and through the circuitry in your wall, extend the internet connection available in your home, are entirely unreliable. We do not recommend power line adapters. Instead, we really recommend that you use a mesh-style network instead, or other kinds of extenders, or ultimately, if possible, an Ethernet connection. DNS servers, that is, dynamic name servers, which are tasked with converting website names into IP addresses, can play a part in how quickly Roon can respond to network requests. We have found that ISP DNS servers that are provided automatically on your ISP-provided modem are frequently unstable. In recent Roon updates, we've tried to harden Roon against DNS failures, but we found better overall reliability comes from using either Cloudflare DNS, the Quad9 DNS, or Google's provided DNS. If you use IP address communication inside of Roon, we highly recommend that you use an IP address reservation. Usually, that IP address lease time is relatively short. It's about 24 hours. So if you're going to use IP communication, we recommend that you set up an IP address reservation for your router specific to the device used in Roon. You'll be able to find that setting in your router, and that will ensure the most reliable performance there. If you're not sure what that means, it's okay. Chances are it's not something that you're looking to use. However, if you are interested in managing the IP address communication on your network, manage that performance inside of Roon and make sure that you're using an IP address reservation inside of your router configuration if at all possible. If you want to use IPv6, just keep in mind that while running Roon does work via IPv6, it's still a technology that's being rolled out. And if possible, we do recommend that you use IPv4 if you're seeing any experiences or issues with IPv6. Next up, troubleshooting some common issues. If you're experiencing any problems, you can save a lot of time and headache by running some really basic tests on your network. And the philosophy that we'd like to keep in mind is really just the process of simplifying and then rebuilding. You're looking to eliminate certain aspects of your network, certain things that might be causing trouble going, and to try and reduce and take away the number of problem factors, and then put them back together. Then you check. Now that I've removed this particular cable, maybe a piece of networking hardware, and replaced it with something else, or bypassed a connection and removed an interim device, any of that simplification process can help with finding out, hey, whatever I removed from the setup was actually the issue. We find that oftentimes taking the network apart and simplifying it is the easiest way to troubleshoot a networking-related Roon issue. If you can just leave the router and Roon core connected via Ethernet to see if the issue persists, then you have a baseline and can continue to add complexity from that point. Again, you just take your device at your core, have it connected via Ethernet to your router, and then see if your remote still can't see it, or if you still have that audio dropout or other similar issues. Likewise, you may be able to connect your audio zone via Ethernet, troubleshoot from the other end, and then see, does my audio zone still not work properly when wired? Again, we're simplifying the number of connections here, removing that Wi-Fi setup, so on and so forth. You want to make sure that your Roon core and your remotes are on the same subnet as each other. If they're not on the same subnet or the same IP address range, then they won't be able to see each other. And that means ensuring that while your core is wired, the Wi-Fi network that it's being broadcast to is the same Wi-Fi network that your wireless devices are also on, and that they're using the same IP range. We have to make sure that the network subnets are all the same thing, so that all the different devices are able to see each other. If you have an ISP-provided modem router combo unit, and if you're using another router that you have yourself provided to broadcast Wi-Fi around your home, make sure that only one of those devices is performing and routing the IP address assigning. Again, you want to make sure that your network-provided combo device is set up in bridge mode, that it's not acting as a secondary router function, because you want to use your own router that you've provided. Making sure it's in bridge mode will basically guarantee that you're not running improper IP provisioning, that you're not running into any issues or any funky networking routing from different devices connecting to the wrong networks, even though the networks are named the same. Little things of that nature are what we want to do to make sure that all those little areas are tidied up so that you have a very clean signal and a clean overall network that your devices are able to connect to. VPNs and Apple Private Relay are different services that can cause Roon to not work properly at all. What you're doing with a VPN or a virtual private network is you're tricking the Roon core into thinking that it's part of a different network, or you're tricking your device into thinking that it's not inside of the network that you're looking to be a part of. And what that would mean is that the core is not able to see the devices that are on the network because, well, it doesn't think they're there. And it thinks it's a part of a totally different network. Therefore, it has no clue to search for those devices that are on your network because, well, they're not there. So we recommend that you don't use any of those VPN services unless your VPN is configured specifically to exclude Roon traffic or that your VPN is on a router level. A router level VPN means that the entire network is being privately isolated out to a separate location. It's being broadcast as a whole unit, and your core will be a part of that whole unit as it's being VPN'd across the world. And because it's still a part of that whole network and all the devices on it, it will be able to see everything because they're all part of that same network, and it'll be able to connect and play your music as you would expect. Most routers have a setting called IGMP proxying or IGMP snooping. If you're having issues with multicast, which means that audio device discovery or Roon remote connecting, you can try and toggle that IGMP switch on and off and see if that helps with any of those issues. Now, if you have any questions about where to get help, or if you want to take a deeper dive on any of the topics that we've covered today, or if maybe you've brought new questions to mind, or maybe we haven't addressed the question that you're looking for help with, we're happy to give you some general advice as to what the best practices are, how to use Roon, and how you can best facilitate what's going on in your system with the questions and answers session in this webinar. But when it comes to active troubleshooting and making the most of solving a current problem that you're trying to work through with your system, go ahead and reach out to us at community.roonlabs.com. We have full-time staff there, and our whole community of people who are inside of the Roon Labs community are super helpful and extremely knowledgeable. It's a great resource for learning knowledge associated with like-minded people and ideally finding solutions to problems that you might be experiencing with Roon. If you're looking for tools for learning more about Roon, if you're hoping to solve your own problems all by yourself, or if you're just looking for screenshots on how things work and looking to build a general knowledge of how Roon works and what it's able to do, go to help.roonlabs.com. It's a huge knowledge base provided with tons of troubleshooting and useful tips and resources for understanding what Roon is capable of and how it can be used as a tool. Again, go to community.roonlabs.com for direct access to our technical support team, as well as our community full of technically knowledgeable people and a huge resource for active troubleshooting and problem solving for your system. If you're looking for more proactive ways to learn and understand what Roon does and how you can use Roon, go to help.roonlabs.com. We'll be opening up our questions and answers session now, and we'll be answering any questions that you might have had throughout this webinar, as well as any additional questions that you have now. Thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we'll catch you again soon. Hello, everybody. Thank you again for joining us today. I'll skip this back just a little bit, keep those links up on the screen so that everyone can jot them down or visit them as you're interested. We've had a good number of questions come in. Very grateful for that. I guess we'll just kind of kick it off talking about, I think, multiple subnets. Norris, do you mind sharing a little bit of insight on this guy?
Sure, absolutely. So Roon is not typically configured with multiple subnets or multiple VLANs in mind. That being said, some of our users have gotten it to work, but this usually requires some kind of advanced network configuration. And this is because Roon makes heavy use of the multicast protocol, and we use this multicast protocol for device discovery and Roon remote discovery. And when multicast is not configured correctly, Roon won't work correctly. So the big issue is that if you set up VLANs, they contain everything within, their own VLAN. So multicast doesn't flow freely between VLANs, and you need to manually configure that with what is usually called an MDNS reflector. And that is just a little bit more complicated. And there's many ways you can configure it, but you have to do it just right to ensure that that traffic passes. Otherwise, Roon won't work properly. So while our users have gotten Roon to work across VLANs and multiple subnets, it's not natively supported because we cannot know all the settings that your specific setup would need to ensure that works properly.
Perfect. Yeah, ultimately, I think it boils down to reliability, as well as Roon's ability to see around your network and um, set up your devices and stream to them consistently. So that's where that recommendation comes in. And again, you can make it work. You can try it out yourself, but if you're running into problems, that's probably one of the first areas that we would point out is this is probably where you're finding issues with what Roon is able to do. We have a customer reaching out about their DevUlay expert, and they've mentioned that they have it connected via Ethernet. However, they found that it only works via Wi-Fi when pairing with Roon. So I guess a couple things here. When we recommend wired connections, that recommendation is coming from our desire for stability in streaming for your network. There's a lot of reliability to be had when you're using a wired connection versus a wireless connection. So when you're talking about which connection should I use, our recommendation for using Ethernet again is for consistency, to make sure that it doesn't drop out, that you're getting the best possible signal at all times. For your particular device, you want to make sure that the settings on Roon and your DevUlay expert are in sync, that they're matching. You want to make sure that they are set to the same DCHP, which will ensure that they are matching in the form of communication that they're reaching each other by. You're going to also want to make sure that, again, that there's no subnet or VLAN kind of differentiation happening between what network your Roon core is on versus what network your expert is on. The best way for us to be able to kind of dig in and work through this step by step with you is going to be through community. So if you could open up a post at community.roonlabs.com, we can go step by step and figure out why it might be that your device is, seeing your Roon core on your network via Wi-Fi, but is struggling to do so when you're using a wired connection. We have a question about what does Google DNS mean? Are we referring to using Google DNS for a particular piece of hardware, for the core, or something like that? Google DNS is I think name server is the technical term. Norris, correct me if I'm wrong there, but what's happening is that is how the devices inside of your home internet network are interpreting the information coming in from the internet so that they can understand and communicate their IP information into websites and so on and so forth. We have found that third-party DNS servers from Google, from Cloudflare, offer better speed and better reliability than the one that's built into your router that comes from your internet service provider. And so we are recommending that you go into your router specifically. That's the device on your network that'll need this change. And inside of its settings, usually you'll access this through a web browser. You can change that DNS protocol to the information given by Google or given by Cloudflare. And that will improve the network performance potential coming from your network there. Is that's more or less on, right? I think.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So these domain name servers, what they do is they translate, websites like google.com into actual IP addresses, like 1.798. Whatever Google's IP currently is. And actually, Roon in recent builds has some added, call it resilience towards DNS failures. So we have been working on, bettering our DNS resolving system, even when, you might not have you might not have the perfect DNS resolving system due to ISP DNS or something like that. But still, it is just generally helpful in any kind of network just to make sure that you have fast DNS servers. And what we've seen is typically that, ISP provided DNS servers do not always work the fastest, which is why we suggest users switch over to Google or Cloudflare or Quad9. Those are usually our top three. And it doesn't really make a difference which one of them you use, as long as it's just not the ISP DNS server. But like I said, Roon is more resilient these days towards DNS kind of errors. We had seen quite a lot of them in the past, but now, we implemented some changes where Roon does its own kind of DNS resolving internally, which helped a lot.
Awesome. Super helpful context. Thank you. Yeah, so there you have it. Hopefully that clarifies things a little bit. If you had any additional questions, feel free to clarify and we can answer those the best we can in regards to DNSs and recommendations there. All right, we have someone mentioning a little bit of a technical issue with their system. I'll give a little bit of what our thoughts and insights on what might be going on here. Open a post with us at community.roonlabs.com. Our technical support team, specifically Norris and many of the people helping run this webinar, will be there on community helping you. Please let us know. We can work directly with you and figure out what exactly is going on with your system. That's what we're here for. And yeah, it's maybe not the same as just reading the forum. Opening a post means that we can give you direct insights to exactly what you're experiencing. In this case, someone is finding that title is loading slowly, and when they're streaming title specifically from Roon, it's loading slowly. They mention that their connection maybe isn't the best at about 15 megabits per second. It seems that it might dip down to 4 megabits per second, if I'm reading that correctly. But all the other streaming media that they found on their network is generally stable. And our initial kind of reaction here is this could be because of all the devices running simultaneously on your network. Streaming title through Roon over your home network requires about 5 megabits per second of bandwidth. And, if your overall bandwidth is that low, you might be seeing throttling happening because other devices are using up the necessary roadway that title is needing from Roon specifically to make that stream happen. This would be especially true if you're trying to stream to more than one zone at once using Roon. So at that point, our recommendation is going to be to simplify. Maybe make sure that there are no other devices being used at all that are accessing your network at the same time that you're trying to listen to music from Roon. See if that alleviates the issue. Past that, we're gonna again want to be trying to simplify things down and make sure that all of that bandwidth is able to reach your core, or that it's able to stream from your core to whatever listening zone that you want to use. If there's any limitations there, you might again be seeing throttling, and therefore less information is able to be communicated, and Roon isn't able to get a consistent signal, which is why you would see dropouts. So yeah, if that doesn't quite help and you're still seeing issues, let us know on community. That's absolutely what we're there for, and we'll be able to dig into what might be going on in your network. I have a general question about Wi-Fi, which is what problems might one face? Are we talking about signal quality loss? Are we talking about lag or delay? We're talking about signal quality loss first and foremost. Latency, that is lag, might become a factor, but generally the issue at hand is that Wi-Fi has limited bandwidth. It can run into consistency issues where signal reaches or signal doesn't reach, and then your music drops out and you wonder why. Whenever possible, that's why we're recommending against using Wi-Fi. Perfectly fine for a remote, because that remote doesn't need a constant stream of data to and from your core to allow you to see what's going on with your music and press play and pause and things like that. The amount of information being transferred there is less than what's being streamed for your music. And if there is maybe just a split second dropout, you're not going to notice that on the screen in the same way that you're going to notice that my music stopped and then resumed playing. So the reliability that a wired network offers is just worth it, in our opinion. Um, and that's why, given the choice, we highly recommend using that wired connection instead of Wi-Fi. Yes. Going to the next one. Any thoughts about Roon and manual or automatic router QoS protocols? I actually don't know what QoS is, Norris. Norris's answer to this directly was QoS should be fine most of the time as long as you don't have any issues with Roon. You should be okay. If you start running into issues, try turning that off as the first kind of step. But I don't know what that acronym stands for.
Yeah, sure. I can explain a little bit. So QoS is quality of service. That's usually a feature implemented on a router level, and it just designates how much bandwidth goes to each device, and like it limits stuff from hogging all the bandwidth on a network. If you only have 500 megabit connection, even though that's very generous, like some devices use up all of that when you're streaming 4K video, stuff like that. So you sometimes implement QoS to ensure that there's remaining bandwidth for other devices on the network. So Roon can work fine with QoS, as long as it has enough bandwidth to stream what you requested it to do and all the DSP. It should be fine. But like I said in the comment, if you have any issues with QoS turned on, it's pretty easy usually to turn it off and just see if Roon works as expected with QoS off. And then obviously you can go back and edit your QoS settings to give Roon that extra bandwidth needed to perform its duties.
Awesome. I learned something today. But yeah, that makes sense. As long as it's prioritizing everything adequately and Roon fits into that priority structure, it sounds like things will be fine. Okay. Next question was the Google DNS information. Helpful to know the addresses that you're putting into your router when you're adjusting your DNS settings are 8.8.8.8 or 8.8.4.4. That's the addresses for Google DNS. If you Google it, that information will pop up as well. Super easy to come by. And that's just the information that you would be adjusting inside of that setting in your router. Does using Wi-Fi as opposed to Ethernet limit the sample rate supported by streaming, specifically for Roon-ready devices? Generally speaking, no, it shouldn't limit the sample rate that your device is capable of doing. Of course, this will vary. Some devices can't even do Wi-Fi streaming. Some are Ethernet only. Our main recommendation here is all around stability more so than raw resolution throughput. I can't say this like universally, but generally speaking, you should be able to transport the same amount of information via Wi-Fi that you would transfer via Ethernet. So in terms of a Roon-ready device, Ethernet versus Wi-Fi, both will be able to transfer that DSC 512 file. That would be fine. But in terms of overall reliability, if there's any kind of dropout in your Wi-Fi connectivity, if your bar dips just a little bit because somebody walked between the signal of your device and the router or something like that, you're really going to notice that a huge chunk of data wasn't transmitted as quickly as needed, because that's a lot of information, especially in a big file like that needs to be communicated. And that's where we're coming from when we're talking about reliability, when we're heavily recommending Ethernet as the connection of choice. So that's the thought process there. And yeah, so in terms of sheer data, Wi-Fi is totally okay. It'll transport all of the information. In terms of overall reliability, less okay. And hopefully that contextualizes where we're coming from there. We have a question: in a scenario where I have two houses that are over 100 kilometers distant from each other, can I use a single Roon core with a single storage? Yeah, you can. the reality is that you're going to need to move your core between the two homes, and that's totally okay. In fact, it's quite convenient if you just have a wall plug and an Ethernet cable sitting waiting for it, depending on which home you're staying in. Plug in both, turn it on, your core is up and running. If you choose to do a two-core solution where you have maybe a hard drive with all of your music on, that you're just going to plug into one core, listen there. When you move to your other home, unplug your hard drive with your music, plug it into the other core at the other location. You'll either need 2 Roon licenses, or you can use 1 Roon license because your license is tied to your email. It's your account. It's not tied to your core. You can upgrade your core. You can make those changes dynamically. And because that license is tied to your account instead of specific to a core, you can simply unauthorize the core that's not in use temporarily, authorize the core that you're currently using, and then flip-flop them back and forth. So at that point, it becomes a question of convenience. How do you want to move your license around? Do you want to move your core around? How do you want to transport your library? If the majority of your library is in, Tidal or Qobuz, that library moves with you through the cloud, because we do sync that library information back to Tidal and Qobuz's servers, and that information does stay synced with their library information that they have stored connected to your account there. So hopefully gives you a little bit of context there. Your ability to use Roon in 2 homes is definitely there. It's maybe not as seamless as we might hope, but it is certainly possible. And we do have a few tools that should be able to take advantage there. Yeah, someone's asking about integration of other streaming services into Roon. And it's a perennial question. I think just about every webinar, it pops up. And it's a great question. The answer, truthfully, is we would love to integrate with your favorite streaming service, whatever it is. We would love to see them inside the Roon app. We want them to be here with us. They need to know that we exist and that there are mutual customers that they share with us that would love to see their service in our app as well. So our recommendation to you is reach out to your streaming service of choice. Let them know that you're a Roon user and you would like to see their service in Roon. The more people do it, the more they realize that there's interest in seeing their service integrate with us. And that's vital because we can't just take, an off-the-shelf API and plug it into Roon and just make it work. We have to work with them directly and get the signal information that we're communicating constantly as Roon streams. Make sure that all of our library metadata services integrate properly with the music that they display inside the app. We have to, do a lot of hands-on work to make sure that it feels very first party. It feels very native to the Roon experience, exactly like what we've done with Tidal and Qobuz. So we need that direct back and forth with the company to make sure that their service works with us. And so let them know that you would love to see the service in Roon, and we would love to see them there as well. So no announcements as far as what services might be coming or anything like that. But yeah, let them know that you're interested in seeing that service work with Roon, and hopefully it'll come to be. Next question is that even with a stable connection, I find that Tidal sometimes seems to be dropping out. There seems to be downtime with my music. Yeah, so the question, I guess, is this person's wondering if we're doing buffering. And the answer is yes, we do perform buffering. And there's constant improvements that we're doing to make the way that Roon buffers and the amount of information that it caches better and better. So if you're experiencing Roon dropouts, especially consistently, and especially if you have internet that is faster than 5 megabits per second, you're streaming to one zone, chances are it is not Roon's buffer that is causing that dropout in your system. We perform buffering. That track or series of tracks that you're about to play do end up cached and ready to go. So if you're seeing dropouts, time to start digging down on the connections between your device. Is it wired? Is it connected via Ethernet? Or is it streaming via Wi-Fi? And then let's dig from there and see what we can do to up the reliability in your network. Because again, as long as your network is generally fast enough, which vast majority of Roon networks are, chances are it's not a buffer issue that you're running into. Chances are it is a connectivity issue that you're experiencing, where information is simply not being communicated in its entirety. So someone's asking if they can monitor the connection between their core and their Roon Ready device. So they're asking specifically if they can see packet loss or latency issues, or if they can see the lack of bandwidth on their end. Norris says, technically, you can look at Roon's logs if you'd like. If you go into help.roonlabs.com and type in logs, that search will pull up exactly the article that Norris has linked here in chat. Again, that's help.roonlabs.com. Search for logs, L-O-G-S, and you'll get an article about how Roon is pulling information. So if you have like a technical support issue and the team wants to learn a little bit more about what's going on in your system, they'll ask you for the system logs. This would be the article they'd link you to see what's going on. You're welcome to open that up and see what's going on inside your system, especially if you're looking for packet drops or things like that. Lots of information there. But other than that, you're going to pretty much be relying on what error messages that Roon is communicating. Signal path does communicate a lot of information as far as what is able to happen in that music stream, as far as the file that's coming in, the file that's going out. But when it comes to actual failures or errors, you're going to be relying on what Roon is able to communicate to you. If you work with us on community, you open a thread and you discuss with us. Our team can ask you for your logs and then help interpret what's going on there. They'll be able to ascertain information from there and work with you to resolve what's going on. So hopefully some helpful information there. Jamie has interjected, you can also add that in as a feature request. It sounds cool. More information is always cool. So again, on community, you can offer up a feature request. We have, I believe, an entire section of the forum dedicated to feature requests. And it seems at least like one other person is interested in seeing that happen inside the Roon app here at the team. So do feel free to offer us feature requests using that functionality in community. We are always open to feedback there. Question about experiences with Wi-Fi 6 and 6E. Do we still have preference for Ethernet, even compared to the latest and greatest in terms of Wi-Fi technology? Yeah, we do. We still prefer Ethernet. Wires to this day are still more reliable than no wires. Maybe at some point in the future that will cease to be the case entirely, but at least with where technology is right now and with how information is communicated and with all of those kinds of requirements, we're going to recommend that you use a wired connection whenever possible. It's still going to be the most reliable. All right, another question coming in talking about buffering. And the question is, does Roon buffer my local music as well as the music that I stream from my connected streaming service? This person in particular finds that their local album streams without delay, and that when they stream a network album or a album from a streaming service, there is a little bit of a delay. For context, Roon buffers both local music and streamed music. It is putting it in a cache for delivery to your device. Again, this partially is to ensure that if you're streaming to multiple zones, everything is delivered simultaneously. If you're all grouped together, you don't want, music to arrive at different times. So yes, Roon is caching your music no matter where it's coming from. Um, Norris's guess here is that it sounds like there's a sample rate issue, or there's like a sample rate switching issue. Um, you could try using Roon's DSP engine to see if, adjusting the sample rate, maybe turning on upsampling, changes the latency there. It sounds to me personally like it's an initial delay on playback. But in terms of, is Roon's buffer impacting why I'm seeing a delay, the answer should be no. The expected behavior is that zero delay, even with streamed tracks. So could be something to do with the sample rate on what's reaching your deck. It could be, something else. If it's something you're invested in, let us know in the community. That's something we can certainly dig into with you. Happy to explore that. Oh, here we go. Very good question. Can Roon be used over a VPN? Yes, it is the technically correct answer. We're not going to help you with that. That is unsupported behavior. Using a VPN to get a device to pretend to be in your home is something that, in theory can work and can help you access your core. But it makes things weird, especially with the way that Roon uses multicast to discover devices around your home. It's not something that we can really help with, because it's such a nebulous issue that if you're planning to do this, you do want to bring appropriate expertise to making it happen. And so you can try it, but there's not a lot we can do to help. That we want to put effort and resources into troubleshooting with you when it comes to actually solving any issues you might have trying to VPN into your home to use your Roon core. Yeah, that's I think a pretty good summary of what's going on there. I think we are mostly caught up to all the current questions. If your question hasn't been answered, I do see somebody raise their hand. Feel free to type out your question in the Q&A box, and we can talk to you there. We aren't using the hand raise feature for people to pop in and talk that way, just the Q&A box. Yeah. I will give just a couple more seconds for people to reach out and talk to us. Someone said thanks. Thank you for joining. We really appreciate that everyone has, taken the time to learn a little bit more about Roon and what it's capable of and how to make it work best. We're really, really privileged that everyone was interested and invested in joining us here. So thank you so much for joining us and learning about Roon. I think that about wraps it up for us. Appreciate your time again. Hopefully you have a great weekend. Give us just a couple more seconds to kind of wrap things up. And I think that's about it. Appreciate it. Have a great weekend, everybody.